Epigenetics and Ubuntu, a new paradigm for social and public health. One of the most important aspects of public health is the understanding that the health of the individual is interdependent with the health of the community. No matter how well one eats and how much one exercises, if there is a segment of the community that is deprived of health, then they might be victim of crime or be infected with a disease that flourished in inhumane conditions that were allowed to persist among the marginalized segments of society. Maslow summarized this by saying, sickness in the individual must ultimately come from sickness in a society. Here in the Bahamas, one of the major questions in public health is why are we so sick as a society? When we look at causes of death, almost all relate to lifestyle. We are number 1 in the world for diabetes prevalence, number 6 in obesity, one of the highest rates of hypertension in the Americas, ranked in the top nations for breast and prostate cancer, and in the top 20 countries for murder rates in the world. In this video, I highlight some of the recent evidence linking social determinants of health to public health outcomes. Mounting evidence suggests that this link is mediated via so-called epigenetic mechanisms, which turn genes on and off in response to environmental cues. And based on emerging evidence that social health interventions can positively impact epigenetic profiles and overall health, I argue that Ubuntu, a philosophy encouraging positive social interactions, can impact and reverse epigenetic states that lead to non-communicable disease, including mental illnesses. First, let's start with some working definitions. The social determinants of health have been a major focus of the World Health Organization in recent years, garnering much attention and funding, and arise out of the earlier, now little-used concept of social health, defined as being able to live in peace and contributing to the welfare of other people. The social determinants of health are defined as the conditions in which people are born, grow, live, work, and age. These circumstances are shaped by the distribution of money, power, and resources at global, national, and local levels. The social determinants of health are mostly responsible for health inequities, the unfair and unavoidable differences in health status seen within and between countries. According to the World Health Organization, public health is defined as the art and science of preventing disease, prolonging life, and promoting health through the organized efforts of society. And Ubuntu is a Bantu term meaning humanity. It is often translated as I am because we are, or humanity towards each other, but is often used in a more philosophical sense to mean the belief in a universal bond of sharing that connects all of humanity. The term epigenetics means literally above genetics, but a recent scientific conference in 2009 published a consensus definition as follows. An epigenetic trait is a stably inherited phenotype resulting from changes in a chromosome without alterations in the DNA sequence. In practical terms, epigenetics refers to the biological mechanisms that control the expression of genes. Epigenetic mechanisms can turn a gene on or off, particularly in response to external cues such as the environment, diet, and also stress. The key thing is, as noted in the consensus view, is that the gene is shut on or off without any changes to the DNA itself that makes up the gene. If genetics can be likened to the computer's hardware, then epigenetics can be similarly compared to the computer's software, which tells the hardware what to play. Epigenetic mechanisms allow for an organism to be dynamically responsive to a given environment, and a number of external factors can impact epigenetic programming throughout a person's life. From social interactions, to the drugs that they take, to their wealth, to their diet, to their activities, and their lifestyle, and so on. In recent years, the WHO and other public health agencies throughout the world have started to view violence through a public health lens. A number of interventions have been recommended, such as safe nurturing relationships, reduced availability of weapons, and gender equality to reduce violence against women. It is notable that these interventions all fall under the philosophy of Ubuntu, and these interventions are themselves based on a rapidly growing body of research on the social determinants of health, which include factors such as the social gradient, employment status, food, transportation, and social support. As part of this, in the public health view of violence, social determinants of health can lead to antisocial behaviours via a relatively new field called behavioral epigenetics. Early research on behavioral epigenetics was done in the mouse, and many of the findings have since been replicated more recently in humans. It has been shown that during critical developmental windows, that is, either in the uterus or during early childhood, stress or trauma can induce epigenetic changes, especially in the brain, which guides behavior, and these epigenetic changes can lead to aberrant behavior in adult life. Although the effect of stress is systems-wide, the hypothalamo-pituitary adrenal axis, or HPA axis, has come to light as a key system mediating the response to stressful stimuli. This is a complex system, but one very important chemical product of the HPA axis is cortisol, which is produced by the HPA axis in response to stress, and under normal conditions will provide negative feedback to the hypothalamus to terminate the stress response. But under conditions of child abuse or prenatal stress, the system is constantly overloaded by stress, which can have a myriad of outcomes depending on the genetic background of the individual, developmental stage of the child, whether prenatal or early childhood, and the nature and severity of the stressor. Abnormal cortisol levels and aberrant epigenetic programming in the HPA axis genes is known to be involved in overall psychopathologies such as post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, and antisocial behavior, issues which persist into adulthood in the absence of early intervention in childhood. Adult aggression is part of the psychopathological milieu that can result from early life trauma or adversity, dependent on the genetic background and subsequent experiences of the person. A state of chronic stress results in increased stress hormones like cortisol, which then results in global and specific epigenetic changes in the developing child's brain, resulting in maladaptive neuronal networks and structures in the brain, impaired learning, and childhood aggression on the trajectory of antisocial and violent behavior. Let's turn to the impact of trauma on the pregnant woman and her offspring. There's robust data from animal studies to show that stress during pregnancy impacts not just the growing fetus, but also the developing germ cells of the fetus that will go on to become the grandchild of the pregnant woman, meaning that 3 generations can be impacted by chronic stress during pregnancy. In humans, emerging evidence supports a similar conclusion, in particular the work of Rachel Yehuda's group, which has shown that in the absence of their own traumatic exposures, offspring of Holocaust survivors are more likely to show HPA axis alterations associated with post-traumatic stress disorder, such as lower cortisol levels. She's also shown that Holocaust exposure impacts the actual epigenetic regulation of the HPA axis, not only in those who are exposed to the Holocaust, but also their children. Likewise, the Rwandan Tutsi genocide survivors and their children both had decreased cortisol levels and altered epigenetic profiles in the HPA axis genes. This emerging data, suggesting that trauma can impact multiple generations, leads to an important question, and perhaps maybe a part of the answer to my original question of why we are so sick as a society. If stress in a pregnant woman can impact the 2 generations after her, then what about during slavery, which occurred over centuries, and its aftermath of racial discrimination that continues to this day? An unanswered question for public health is, what epigenetic impact did this multi-generational trauma to generations of pregnant women have on the modern descendants of enslaved Africans? All in all, epigenetics research is supporting the old African proverb, a child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. There's an exciting wave happening of decolonization of science, health, and medicine in Africa and the diaspora. And Ubuntu is being applied to a number of areas of health, from cancer control to mental health, to right to health, to end-of-life care. All in all, health researchers and policymakers are looking to indigenous philosophies like Ubuntu to drive positive change in social and public health. In addition, epigenetics lays bare how our connectedness and interactions intertwine with the health of the community, and it exposes the inner truth of Ubuntu. Emerging epigenetics research is unmasking a link between socioeconomic inequality, or social determinants of health, and disease risk. The conditions that lead to aberrant epigenetic profiles and disease are perpetuated by a lack of human connectedness, or Ubuntu, at the global, local, community, and family levels. Animal and human research shows that social health interventions can prevent pathological epigenetic states, leading to positive public health outcomes. In other words, the relationship between Ubuntu and epigenetics demonstrates the molecular power of love. In recognition of the emerging research, the WHO recently has put a lot of focus and funding into social determinants of health and set up a commission in 2008 that recommended that public health interventions should include improving daily living conditions, tackling the inequitable distribution of money, power, and resources, and measuring and understanding the problem and assessing the impact of action. However, needless to say, these are political initiatives, and there is little political will, not even for the sake of the health of the community. However, it is notable that all these interventions arguably come under the umbrella of the ancient philosophy of Ubuntu. We have some insights into how to close gaps in health equity, and it has to do with closing gaps in socioeconomic inequality. The philosophy of Ubuntu, which encourages healthy and equitable social interactions and negotiations of power, has been implied by emerging research to be a possible means by which individuals and communities can shift epigenetic states and resultant health outcomes. This mural is from a recent project by the National Art Gallery in Lewis Street and bears a fitting quote by Sir Randall Fawkes, shining the way to a healthy, peaceful, and prosperous existence for all. He said that the end product towards which we strive is the building up of a society which will guarantee to all freedom and opportunity to develop.